Oh, absolutely. All right, good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Phil Horning. I work with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Division of Law Enforcement in our Boating and Waterways section, and I am the Derelict Vessel Program Administrator for the agency. In the old days, it was a Phil Horning and my supervisor job for all of this, but I've been blessed over the last year and a half to have staff and now including our attorney, our intel analyst, budget folks, all of our derelict vessel specialists, our VTIP specialists. We're at 13. So we have a lot more feet on the ground and we're able to cover more extensively what's going on between hurricanes and regular derelict vessels and all of our different removal programs that we're doing right now. In the past, we had been averaging 126 to 150 vessels a year. Sometimes as high as 180. This year, we're going to cross the 1,000 mark in 1 year. So in this 1 year, we're going to have removed more than 1,000 vessels with the assistance of DEM on our hurricane stuff. It's been a collaborative effort. So what I would like to do is I'd like to present an abridged PowerPoint for you from our academy training. This is how we show our officers. The actual course that I would provide to our academy graduates would be about 3.5 hours long. So this is going to be about 20 minutes long. So I'm going to be really cutting and chopping, but I think it will give you a good understanding, if you don't know already, the process by which we use to determine what derelict vessels are, the identification of them, the investigation that goes into them, the due process that is required, the removal of derelict vessels, and again, we'll talk about prevention. So briefly, a derelict vessel is any vessel that is in a wrecked, junked, or substantially dismantled condition upon any waters of this state. This used to be an FWC designation, and it is now statutory. We had that added to statute to clarify for us and all other agencies. It can also be a vessel that's left at any port in the state without the consent of the Port Authority. So if you were to just take a 26-foot Irwin and park it in the Port of Miami within the port's waters and not have permission to do that, they could find that vessel derelict and they could remove it and go through a process to dispose of it if you didn't become involved in getting it taken out of there. It can also be a vessel that's docked or grounded at or beached upon the property of another without the consent of the property owner. At one time, there was some questionability as to whether a docked boat tied to private property was a derelict vessel, and yes, it is. It's still within the waters of the state, so we can treat those as derelict vessels. If it is not wrecked, junked, or substantially dismantled, it would have to be there without the consent of the owner. And at that point, it could be a law enforcement case. We normally try to get people to solve that situation as a civil matter between the owner of the property and the owner of the vessel, but that's not always available. So what are the factors involved? It includes every description of a vessel. And that is a vessel is a watercraft that is used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on the water. And I know we had talked earlier about floating structures, and you could tell by this picture that I have up here, that is a good example of a floating structure. It's an entity that is used as if it were on land. It just happens to be floating. And a lot of people say, what if it has a motor on it? It is allowed to have propulsion for incidental movement. That's to get it from one place to another, but it's still not being used as a means of transportation, which is taking goods or people from one place, point A to point B, maybe returning from point B to point A. So that's not its intended purpose. There is some little gray area when we look at some of these things to determine whether they are a vessel or not. But most of the time, something like this is a floating structure. And I'll explain further so you'll understand the difference between a vessel and what isn't a vessel. It also doesn't include unsightly or ugly vessels. There is no law in Florida statute that prevents a person from owning an ugly boat. And there are a few of them out there. So getting back to the earlier presentation about, you've got these multi-million-dollar upland homeowners that don't like looking at this out there in front of their house. It gets down to who has the right. Is there a right to have that view with being unobstructed? Is there a right for that vessel owner to have their ugly boat in that location? So a lot of this involves looking at the laws, trying to make sure that the laws are being followed and everybody is having their rights adhered to. So I'll go through the three conditions really quickly. What is wrecked? A vessel that is wrecked is sinking, sunken, or hard aground without the ability to extricate itself absent mechanical assistance. So as you can see in the top picture on the left, that's a boat fire. That vessel is hard aground without the ability to extricate itself absent mechanical assistance. It's also, I would submit to you that it is also incapable of using its steerage because that's been burned. It does not have any propulsion, and I would submit also it probably has hull integrity. So it may also be substantially dismantled. It's hard to just look at pictures or look at a vessel that's on the water and decide what it is. That's why we have to have law enforcement go out and assess the vessel to make sure that it meets the statutory requirements of a derelict vessel. That's why that is limited to sworn law enforcement to do that investigation. And it is a crime in the state of Florida to leave your vessel derelict upon the waters of the state. The boat in the middle on the bottom is an easy one. That's sunken on the bottom. It's can't extract itself without mechanical assistance. So that's clearly a derelict vessel by being wrecked. And the vessel on the right is another one. It's, there probably not because the owner put it there. It was put there by a storm, but we're not looking at the intent of the owner. We're looking at the condition of the vessel. That vessel is derelict. It is unable to be moved from that location without mechanical assistance. So if the owner didn't provide the opportunity to get that vessel off of that location and back out into the water or removed from the waters of the state, they would face criminal charges for a derelict vessel and be responsible for the costs of removal if the government has to remove it. Typical junked. A lot of people say, what is a junked vessel? That's the second category. A junked vessel is a vessel that's stripped of all parts of value, or the parts that are left thereon or have become valueless, or the vessel has been cast aside as if discarded by the owner. So you can see two good examples there. These vessels have been stripped of everything, and there's nothing left there that's worth anything, and they've been cast aside. So those are the definition of junk. It doesn't mean that the vessel has a bunch of junk on it. And the last one, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. The last condition of being derelict is being substantially dismantled. There was a lot of controversy over this. Different agencies were doing it different ways. So we actually took our definitions and got them passed into statute. And now there is a clear mechanism for understanding this. A vessel to operate normally has to have three functions. It has to have steerage, it has to have propulsion, and it has to have hull integrity that keeps it floating. So if two of the three of those are missing, or inoperable, broken, damaged, and incapable of performing properly, the vessel can be considered substantially dismantled. Being substantially dismantled makes it a derelict vessel. So this is in statute, and it's a clear way to make that determination. On the top left, you see a vessel with the helm missing. The column under it is missing, and the cables aren't attached to any steering system. So that would be a good example of a missing steering. On the right, you see an engine. Although present, it's inoperable because it's submerged in salt water and seized. So that vessel cannot receive propulsion from that engine. And on the bottom, you see a picture of external hull integrity issues. We're always looking at the external part of the hull at or near the water line. If a vessel has hairline cracks down the bulkhead on top, it's not a derelict vessel because of that. If it's got a couple of spider cracks in the deck, that doesn't matter. We have to have substantial hull integrity issues on the external portion of the hull at or near the water line. So the actual definition is here. I just explained these. I'm not going to read all of that, but if you want to, it's in 823.11 parent 2. And you'll also have a copy of this, I believe, to refer to later. I'm probably going to go a half hour.
You're taking it from yourself.
Okay. I thought we had an hour.
Yeah. We've got 3.
Yeah, I'm covering most of their part.
Yeah, got it.
So a good, and I'll just read this because I think it's important for everyone to understand, especially the other law enforcement agencies, is a good probable cause narrative has to be assigned to the vessel investigation that's going on. It can't just be like, we don't like that and it looks derelict because it doesn't work right. That's not a definition in statute of why a vessel is derelict. You can see one of our officers wrote, this vessel is derelict upon the waters of the state because it's in a wrecked and substantially dismantled condition. It's wrecked because it's sunken in a ground without the ability to extricate itself absent mechanical assistance. It is also substantially dismantled because the helm, although present, is in a non-working condition with cables and mechanical functions broken and unable to properly steer the vessel. The engine is also present but non-functioning as it is submerged in seawater, rendering it incapable of providing the required propulsion. Therefore, with the propulsion and steerage for this vessel being inoperative, it is also determined to be substantially dismantled. And then it's got the venue of where that vessel is located. So it has to meet statute. And we don't care about whether it's not registered. We don't care about anchor lights at night. We don't care about open hatches. Those are at-risk features. We care about what makes that vessel derelict. And that's what we have to be very careful of when we're looking at constitutional rights and properly enforcing law. And our officers are extremely good at this. So the next step is that once the officer has made a determination that a vessel is derelict, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to put a stop on the title. He's going to get in touch with DHSMV and freeze the title. That keeps the owner of that vessel from selling it to somebody else to get away from it. Then he's going to notify each owner or responsible party and all people with a legal interest in that vessel using a notification of rights, which is also required by statute, which gives them an opportunity to request an administrative hearing to determine whether or not the officer's determination of their vessel being derelict was good or not. So once everyone has been notified, then the officer is going to go back and put a sticker on the vessel. And that sticker is going to start the 21-day process. So that everybody's been notified and the sticker goes on the vessel and we start that notification process. We normally don't do derelict vessel investigations within marinas or in homeowners docking systems. Under 328.17, both of those entities have the ability to regulate their own vessels within those entities and cause them to be removed by taking title to them. So if we were to use all of our resources for navigable waters and the real safety issues and environmental issues that are in open waters and do nothing but marina policing, we wouldn't be able to do what we do out in the water where we're supposed to be. So there's also some issues with certain marinas are owned privately. They are for profit. Some public marinas are in a profitable position. And if we were to use taxpayer money to investigate and remove derelict vessels from these marinas to better the marina, there would be a question of use, the fair use of taxpayer money to do that. So there are a few other reasons, but just so you understand, normally we do not do derelict vessel investigations within marinas. We will do them within mooring fields, however. So really quickly, the basic operation of the investigation is the derelict vessel is either observed or called in by the public or the officer on water patrol. Then the officer is going to respond and conduct the assessment to determine the condition of the vessel. If it's a derelict vessel and has been determined by the officer to be derelict, he will or she will begin a derelict vessel investigation. If it's at risk, then the officer is going to issue a citation, a non-criminal citation for the at-risk features. And if it's neither one of those, then the officer is going to close the case out as unfounded, but probably stay close to it to watch its progress. When the officer begins the investigation, they're going to photograph the vessel and they're going to enter their findings, including their probable cause, into the statewide derelict vessel database. They're going to begin their case. The officer is going to identify and locate all of the responsible parties in that particular case and issue them the notification of rights and citations for criminal charging. There is no grace period given to people. This is an old school thing that we used to do. Officer Billy Bob would tell Officer Billy Bob or tell Joe Billy Bob, I'll give you a month. And if you don't get that thing off of the water in a month, then I'm going to charge you. We can't do that anymore, because what you're doing as a law enforcement officer is allowing somebody to continue breaking the law for another 30 days. So we don't have that authority. There are statutory authorities to give time after an accident or a natural calamity of 7 days for the owner to do the right thing and get their vessel off of the water. After a hurricane, it's 45 days before any action can be taken on that vessel. But we don't normally just give people grace periods. We will move forward with charging. The legislature wants us to hold those accountable for derelict vessels and provide proof to that. If the owner is not present, the officer can mail by certified mail these notifications. So then the officer returns, posts the vessel. We wait the 21 days. If the person asks for a hearing, that's great. We'll go forward with a hearing for them, and we'll proceed from there with our legal. If they don't respond, then the officer is going to seek approval for the removal of that vessel, and then we will move forward with removing it after the area captain has signed off on it. And up until that point, the officer is going to be required to update these cases every 120 days. Then the officer is going to be required to verify the vessel has been removed in its entireties and disposed of in an authorized landfill facility using our grant process with Mark. Mark Nicholas is phenomenal at this. The county would pay the contractor for the removal, and then they would submit the paperwork to us, and then we would reimburse Escambia County for that contract. Again, in order for grants to happen, a grant contract has to be executed and in place before the vessels are removed. Once it's in place, then they can move forward with the removal. Derelict vessels can also be directly removed by FWC. We do have a direct line of funding where we can hire our own contractors, and we currently, Double Simmons and our other DV regional specialists are putting together packages of these removal projects. And we are hiring contractors to go out and remove those and paying them directly with purchase orders from FWC. So it's a two-pronged effort: more feet on the ground, more boats getting removed. That's a trifecta. That vessel is wrecked, junked, and substantially dismantled, and it's sitting on a coral reef in Key West. Or it was. It's now gone. We're not supposed to board any vessels and search closed or locked compartments without a warrant. So our officers can get a misdemeanor warrant from a judge to do this, but most of the times there's enough evidence in plain sight for an officer to find the vessel being derelict. So just one of those things. Applies to all DVs with identifiable owners. I'm not going to go through all of, because we're pressed on time. This is the process with which the officer has to go through to do their reasonable effort to identify and locate the owner of that vessel. They can do all sorts of canvassing of areas, database searches, and on all numbers that they have, things like that. They're asking other boaters if they know who owns that boat. They're going to local marinas, asking those marinas if they've ever worked on it and who owned it when they worked on it, things like that. So they have to make a reasonable effort to identify and locate the owner of the vessel. And if they can't, then it will be removed as an unidentified owner. But if we do have an owner and they refuse to remove their vessel from the waters of the state after they've been told to do so, then we will remove it. And then after we remove it, we will send them a demand letter saying they owe our agency the cost of removal. So whatever that cost is. And if they don't pay that cost back within 30 days, then we will suspend their registration privileges for all vehicles and vessels in Florida until they pay. And I think we've returned about 10% of the money we've spent through that process. It's very difficult for our attorneys to go sue every single person and try to collect our money back. So that's not the biggest effort in recouping those funds. But they are, just so you understand, these people are responsible for paying back, even if it's a grant. They have to pay back the money that was used from the removal funding by the state or a local entity. So that's the nickel tour of derelict vessels. I could have spent 3